if enterprise search isn't available to me in the intranet, I've then got to go somewhere else in order to initiate this other search. So it felt right to have the two. We have an intranet search, we have an enterprise search.
You could also go and hide the Microsoft search bar. Technically, that's possible. So you could hide that. There is a PowerShell, then this becomes very technical. So no worries. Ask your IT people, they will be able to help with that. So there is an option. Unfortunately, there is no UI for this. So that's something I find not ideal. But yeah, so there is an option to hide that bar. Or as you mentioned, right? So there are the use cases where you want to have the access to both. So the internet search and the entire organizational data search.
Yeah. And obviously, we think the best option, if you're looking for a solution to this problem, is to buy fresh. Second best, maybe third best option is that you could build something yourself. That comes along with all of the risk of building additional features within SharePoint. I've sat in numerous presentations from customers at events where they're showcasing this out-of-the-box SharePoint intranet. And when you speak to them afterwards, you say, and how do you find the search experience in your out-of-the-box SharePoint? More often than not, they say, well, that is actually the one thing that we did customize, that we created a custom search feature for our intranet. So I think particularly in large enterprise organizations, they need a specific search.
Ha! Almost forgot that. Hey, welcome everyone. It's a new episode, isn't it, David?
Hello. Hi. Yes. Hi, David Bowman, product director. I almost forgot who I was then. David Bowman, product director for Fresh Intranet.
So it's a good start today. So I'm Jarbas Horst, senior product manager for Fresh here at Edinburgh UK. And today we're talking about, and I think it's very provocative, right? So SharePoint Internet Search. Why do you hate me? So how do we come with those titles, David? Maybe you can help us here.
So we were talking last week about this, my method of ice breaking with people at events, where I say, do you use SharePoint? Do you love SharePoint? And one of the main things that people say in response to, when they say they don't really like SharePoint or they're not in love with SharePoint, and one of the main reasons that people come back on this one is search, and that people are having a, shall we say, a less than amazing experience using search in their SharePoint intranet. And I thought it would be worth just kind of digging into a bit of why this experience isn't great for people. We're going to talk about some of the challenges, why it's not working, how this presents itself in SharePoint. And then obviously we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do about it with, one pretty obvious conclusion that we're going to work up to in the episode today.
Excellent. So so we can start kind of with this introduction part and talking about search and so what's happening and why people aren't getting what they want when it comes to search in the context of the intranet.
Yes. And I think the kind of the way that the problem is articulated is search is awful, results are from everywhere. The information that I'm getting back is not specific to my intranet. And I think probably my least favorite pushback on this is that, the sort of general articulation is that people want some consumer grade experience for search.
I mean, we can iterate and go through each of those kind of problems that we hear from clients. And actually, as you mentioned at the beginning, so when a lot of the discussions we have with people looking for a new intranet, to improve in their current internet experience, is search is one of the things that they want to improve, change, make better. I think it's definitely worth us having this discussion, and hopefully will also be valuable for people listening. But if we focus a bit on those problems, when it comes to search being awful or the results being from everywhere. So what does that mean in maybe a bit more in detail?
Yeah, so I think that I guess difficult to show visually, but the experience that people are having with search in SharePoint or in any of the Microsoft 365 applications is You have the suite nav bar, which is probably an outdated term that I'm using there, but probably just demonstrates how long I've been doing stuff in Microsoft 365 for. And there is a little search box that sits in the middle of that bar in any of the Microsoft 365 applications. And you can tap something into that box. You'll get a bit of type ahead. It'll start suggesting things to you. And that box has context of the application that you're currently using. So the sort of things that you're going to see in there are going to be different between Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, Power BI, right? Wherever you are, you're going to get some level of context about the Microsoft 365 application that you're currently using. And when you're in a SharePoint intranet, and you're tapping some things in that box, the result that you're getting is, can feel a little unpredictable because it changes depending on where you are in SharePoint, right? So, I think that it's creating this perception that search is bad because it is a bit of a confusing experience of using that single search box across all of these different applications.
And I think one I was thinking about this, like, no, it's called Microsoft Search, so it's not like a SharePoint search.
Yeah, or intranet search, right?
Or
to be kind of
search,
specific about workload.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you mentioned you mentioned workload. I like that. So now about containing the results you are getting from just this workload, which is the intranet, which by default is not the case. No? So it will give you everything.
Yes. It will give you the results will be contextual to SharePoint, right? So you're getting results from SharePoint, but if your intranet that you've got a kind of out of the box SharePoint intranet that's made up of a collection of different sites in there, your first point is going to be getting results from either the site, the hub, the list, the library that you are currently in. So there's going to be some context to not just SharePoint, but also the location that you're running the search from.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. It can also be very confusing. We'll get there and talk a bit more about that.
Yeah.
And when we talked about so that the search should be similar to those consumer experiences, and a very common one is kind of the Google experience.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think people are kind of expecting this consumer grade experience when you say to them, okay, so how many people in your organization are responsible for search, right? From either the outcomes from search, how the search interface works, what's the level of investment that the organization is putting into search? In 99% of cases, the answer to that is 0. But at the same time, what you're expecting is a kind of consumer grade experience like Google, multi-billion-dollar company, huge amount of investment going into all the different elements of search, from the user interface to the back end, creating this kind of modern search experience, which is now also being enhanced with AI. So I think it's a difficult thing to have the same expectation that you're going to get a Google-like experience effectively for free within your Microsoft 365 tenancy.
Yeah, well, definitely. So when we are discussing this with clients, and you might have, it's as you mentioned, it's maybe this 1% of clients who will have then a dedicated person managing. Well, not managing the entire search, but responsible. One of their tasks is search and trying to improve that experience and extending that. But that's the minority of the cases. And so on adding on what you mentioned, right? So the expectations that people maybe might have nowadays on search. So I'm not sure. Do we still want a search that is similar to what Google provides? If that would be a discussion 3 years ago, I think we would have be in agreement that's how it is. But now we have experienced other forms of getting answers to the things that we are looking for, and I'm looking here at towards generative AI. So do you think that this could also be a direction where expectations of people would go?
Yeah, I think it's a changing area, right? I think the way that I use search, for example, now has changed, as you say, in the last 3 years with lots of different technologies. Depending on what I'm looking for, I will opt for different tools, whereas previously I would have just started with Google. I probably use Bing more. It's
right.
The default search engine. I can usually find what I want in that product. But if I'm looking for kind of any kind of research on a particular topic, or I'm trying to get started on a new initiative, I will often go to ChatGPT as the sort of kind of my main port of call. If it's work related, I'll stick to using Copilot because they're the kind of tools that I've got in front of me. But I guess the way that people are searching, I think, is changing. I think if you work in tech, it's changing faster than if you are not working in tech.
Yeah.
So I think you'll end up with this kind of mixed experience of people in organizations needing something that is a better search, and probably a growing percentage of people that are going to be expecting answers rather than content.
Yeah, I like that. So because that's how the conventional search. Well, I'm mentioning conventional now. How search has been so far. Like you get kind of the links to resources that might contain the answers, and usually like that's the case when we are looking at like the SharePoint search, the Google search, when that content that's available like is also accurate, and then like we're using AI, so you are getting the answers directly, which I'm curious, like just like how this will evolve in the future, right? So we'll be relying like on AI to give us the answers. But yeah, let's see how that develops.
I think it's also worth just kind of making sure that we're clear on what it is that we are. I guess because we're kind of criticizing a search feature that works inside of Microsoft 365, and I think for me, there's a distinction between. This is enterprise search, right? So when I'm typing things into that search box in a Microsoft 365 application, I'm able to tap into all the content that lives in Microsoft 365 in the tenancy that I'm in. And I think the challenge that people are having is not necessarily with enterprise search. The challenge is trying to use enterprise search in an intranet, which is going to be a subset of the content that lives in Microsoft 365. So, I think for the purpose of this conversation, I'm drawing a distinction between how people are finding content in Microsoft 365 versus how people are using search when they are in the context of an intranet.
Right. Well, and you mentioned enterprise search. So like when we are talking about enterprise search, now we are looking at this one source of truth that, as you mentioned, so we will not just like when we're building enterprise search now, so it's not just about the content from the intranet, but we also want to get results from like related applications that are part of our digital workplace. Common applications are that we select with our clients, like Confluence and ServiceNow, also very common. And sometimes database, like people come and bring like, oh, we have data in a database that we would like to also have like user access in that, like from the search on the intranet. So that's where we are like looking at enterprise search and how this works usually.
Yeah, and I think it can be a confusing thing to talk about and think about and plan for as well, because you've got slightly different scenarios going on here. So, if I relate this back to a use case within the Advania business, our intranet provides intranet type functionality, right? News, content, tools, links, strategy information from the organization, events of things that are happening. We've got access to a bunch of information and content in there, and all of that information lives in a series of SharePoint sites, and it is walled off as being our intranet. But alongside the intranet workload and all the content and sites that are in there, we've also got a huge volume of Microsoft Teams, of sites that have been created through Microsoft Teams. A lot of those have external sharing and content and information going to customers. We have contracts and a bunch of other sensitive information, which has different levels of permissions and security. And as an employee, I want to be able to tap into the content that lives in our intranet on occasion. There are other occasions when I would need to be able to tap into the content that lives in all of those other sites that don't belong in the intranet. So I've got this kind of dual experience of search that I'm looking for, finding things that belong in the intranet and finding things that are not intranet type content. I think that's a valid scenario for people to think about.
Yeah. So it's the workload that you are referring to. So the internet as one of the workloads, and then you might also like have different ones depending on the scenarios that you might have in the organization. And then I'm trying like to build this search in this way that we're going to find information across like those different workloads. So the more specific you can be, so the better it is like for the end users in the end, because they know like what they're going to get from when they start that search experience, and that will give them information from that workload.
And I think that criticism of the results aren't always relevant comes from this problem, right? Of as a user, I'm in the intranet, or I'm in a part of Microsoft 365 that I view as being the intranet. And when I run this search, I've got content that's coming from places that are not the intranet. Rather than saying to me, there's no content in the intranet about that item that you've just looked for, what I'm getting is results from lots of other places because I've got permission to be able to see them. So I've got, no real way as a user of knowing whether this is content that's in the workload of the intranet or just general content that people are creating and using in Microsoft 365.
You have this aspect, and you mentioned before, right? So this same search box will, depending on where you start that from, like the search from, will give you like different results. So, and you have kind of those different scopes.
Yeah, so let's cover a few of them. So you're in an out-of-the-box SharePoint site, which is designated as your home site, and you've got a home page, and you've got that search box at the top of the bar, and you type something in there. What are you now looking at? Where are the results coming from?
Yes. Well, so when you are like in the context of your home site and you trigger that search, so it will look across like the entire content, right? So now if as you start moving down like within the site, if you go like into a library and we're looking like for documents, or if you go into a list and we're looking like for date within that list, so if you start the search from that space, it will just look for information within the list or within the library.
And there's a subtle indicator there, isn't there? So if you switch from a site to a library, there is a label change in that search box, which says, I think it says something like search in SharePoint or search in site or search in list.
Yes, exactly. So search this list, search this site. And I think it's logical, like the way how it's built, like there is a logic in there, which might be confusing, but it has like a certain logic, right? So you are within the list, you start the search, right? So, okay, so you are looking for information within that list. The challenge is like, you have that tab open and then suddenly and you want to find some information, and then you trigger like, you still like have the same context, the list and the search box. You go into search box and you type something because you want to find information within SharePoint, within your intranet, and it will again just look within that list. So yes, that's where I think it can become confusing for users.
It's putting quite a lot of knowledge on the shoulders of the user to know the difference between these pieces of SharePoint architecture, right? Because, if as an employee, you are somewhat familiar with the concept of the intranet, right? So you've opened the browser, you're in the company's intranet, you're looking for information. You aren't necessarily thinking about what a site is, what a list is, what a library is when you're running
a site is.
Yeah, when you're in the intranet. So it's requiring that the end user understands a little bit about how SharePoint is architected in order to be able to get the results that they're looking for. And I think that's a pretty tough expectation to have.
It is like, as users, you are in the flow of your work, and you need like to start thinking.
Document.
Yeah. Yes, like you need to start like to think how can I find information, or like how can I use the search to find information, and not just like and that's going back to Google. You have the same search box and you enter something and then it will come with the results, right? So you don't need to understand how do I operate the search system to get like the result.
And I think that's an important distinction there, that coming at this from the user's perspective rather than from an engineering perspective, right? The user's in the intranet and there is a search box that they're typing in a search term for. They are used to using search tools and they're somewhat familiar with how the results will be working. So they will be expecting at least some level of relevant information based on what they have keyed into the search field. And when they don't see that, the response is going to be, our search doesn't work.
Yeah. Yes, which might not like be necessarily like the case, right? So you have a functional search and it has been configured properly, but it's more people don't understand how to use that. So scoping is one of the challenges, I think. And then when you so if you are at a site level, so you are not like now in a library, and you trigger the search, so you then get redirected to a different experience. That's completely like different from SharePoint, right? So dedicated, like it's Microsoft Search, dedicated search
and
experience.
that's different branding as well, potentially.
Potentially, exactly. Now you might have like customize your SharePoint with custom fonts, and of course, like you have like different theme colors that you can apply like to your out of the box SharePoint as well, and then you will be landing in a different place. Yeah, so that can be confusing as well. Plus, you have also like the option of navigating this search structure, like where you can go like from the site to the hub, from the hub to the entire organizational data, and that also like means always you are like moving from one scope to the other, which can, I think, be for the users also like a bit overwhelming if you are not, like as you mentioned, like if you don't understand the architecture and all of those terms as well.
Yes, and I think this is because SharePoint has the potential for multiple workloads, so an intranet, a knowledge management system, some project sites, some team sites, a document management platform, Microsoft Teams, informal communities. There's a whole bunch of use cases that could be creating SharePoint content in this thing. Search ultimately doesn't really understand where the walls are between these workloads, right? It's treating everything, as long as you have permissions to be able to see it, everything has some level of equivalent weighting.
Yes. So it could be used for different use cases you mentioned. So then I think that's where the challenge that people maybe have in the end, because the search could be used for different scenarios, as we have just mentioned, but you want that for something specific, and that's where I think the challenges are.
Yes, and left out of the box, the search results aren't going to be don't understand where the intranet begins and where the intranet ends, or where the document management system begins or ends, or where the knowledge management system begins or ends. There's no the search isn't intelligent in that way to understand this content is just intranet. It's not giving you results on the basis of a defined workload.
Yeah, you need to do something about that, like to change it.
And then, speaking of doing something about it, there are options to be able to do something about it. So there is a thing called the Search. Is it the Search and Intelligence Center in Microsoft?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that exists as a kind of admin center of its own, rather than being something that's configured as part of SharePoint. And there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot in there. But it requires that you've got some level of advanced permissions, or you have a buddy in IT that you can go and talk to. So we'll come on to the configuration options, because the thing I just wanted to pick up on is one of the other things that you can do about search, and that you probably should be doing about search, is spending some time on content governance.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, and well, if the results, let's say you have done all of the configurations and now people are not getting kind of the good results, then it's where governance helps to improve that quality. And it's a work that you would like do, and it would not just be for search. So when you have things like Copilot also in place, it's also an area that will benefit from that content being in a good quality.
And I remember being a young SharePoint consultant at some stage. Believe it or not, that was a point in time. And governance was always felt like a sort of a kind of confusing term that seemed to mean different things to different people. What's under this umbrella of governance? What are the sort of things that people could be doing to improve the quality of their content?
I think it's like putting rules in place that help you maintain your content. So that's one of the things you can definitely do, right? And creating overviews of your content. But like if we start looking at SharePoint in general, right? So it's a bit hard to get an overview of all of the content that you have. So if we're looking at our content pages, for example, or of course our documents and the policies and the guides and the templates, so that might be distributed across multiple sites, right? So you might have
in a larger organization, we could be talking about hundreds or thousands of sites.
Yes, like your department sites, and you might have a kind of the main site, maybe like when you look at the structure of an intranet, for example. And now how do you bring all of that in an overview? And that's, I think, unfortunately where by default SharePoint doesn't have that option. But then creating that overview, I think it's the first step, and then having good ways of also of structuring that information provide, like being able to display like, who is the content owner for that content, and then starting looking at how can I automate that that content management. So having a review date, an expiration date for the content. Ideally, you have like some automation in place, looking at like Power Automate, creating a workflow that helps you do that automatically. But I think the at least part is like having an overview where you can see like what is that content, what does that look like.
Yeah, and the best options, I think, as you say, for kicking off a content governance initiative are generally going to require that you're using some third-party tools.
I think so as well, because if out of the box is not providing the options, then I think it would be a lot of configuration work, and that across like multiple places, multiple sites, where you need like really to go and configure things individually, add the metadata like to different places, and then creating kind of this. I like to work with automation this space because that can speed up and help people like kind of get reminders, and ideally also like having some archiving place, right? Because if people don't end up like doing anything with that content, so then you have a process in place for that as well.
We talked a bit with Kai from Swoop Analytics on an episode recently about the kind of importance of this topic. And how overwhelming it can feel. If you have a SharePoint intranet or SharePoint in general, which has been left unmanaged for a long time, maybe with a bit of chaotic growth, lots of sites, lots of content, owned or created by people that have left the organization a while ago, getting on top of this can feel like a real tough job. Somewhere where third-party tools can definitely help. But, even just getting started on this, right, of being able to identify sites that are no longer being used, finding content that is old, outdated, not owned by anyone, and maybe if you're not feeling brave enough to delete it, moving off to archived areas. They're kind of just some simple, tangible things that people can do to get started on a governance initiative.
Yeah. So then, using a third-party solution, well, we provide as Fresh, right? So the different tools that help with the content governance on the internet. Alternatively, you could maybe be looking at something different. There is a community solution that people could be using to create overviews as well. From the PNP initiative, that could also be used.
And then, as far as configuring search, then we've got the Search and Intelligence Center, which lives in the Microsoft 365 admin, which you may or may not have access to. I think the challenge for lots of people that we speak to, if you're in internal comms or you're intranet manager that isn't necessarily in the IT department, you probably won't have access to this. And you're left kind of trying to get a task on somebody else's to-do list.
So we were talking like to a client the other day, and the person mentioned that when it comes like to collaborating with different teams in the organization, that can become like complicated, right? So you are part of the comms team, and you just have access like to your intranet in SharePoint, and now you want to perform tasks that will require an administrator, or you want maybe like to automate a specific piece of work, and then you might require like the team that's working kind of on Power Automate. So that you need like to then start maybe get an approval, get kind of additional support from people, and that might not be like their priority, right? So that's where things might become a bit more complicated when you have like those scenarios where you need like to go to different system, maybe like different area of the system that require kind of elevated privileges. So that can become a bit more complicated, I think.
And I think this is certainly one area where getting search right is important. The challenge, I think, in this area is that it can be a bit of a battle trying to get these sort of admin changes made. Changes that you're making in this Search and Intelligence Center are going to have an effect on lots of different workloads that are in Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, not just the intranet. So, you're using enterprise search, and changes that you're making here are going to apply to enterprise search across the organization. These changes can't be just limited to your intranet workload if that's all you're responsible for. So, you could have this battle to try to get changes made and get buy-in or budget or, whatever it is that you need to do to be able to get access to this configuration center, or have someone sit with you while you get access to this configuration center to discover that the things that you can do are maybe going to get you some of the way to the answers that you're looking for, but probably aren't going to give you exactly what you need either.
Yeah, well, the Search Intelligence Center comes with a lot of configuration options. So if we start looking at the enterprise search aspect, where you want to have data that goes beyond just SharePoint and OneDrive, so you have kind of the connectors that you can use, those, like some available by default from Microsoft, and you can also like build your own connectors. But that's where you can then bring that data like from Confluence and WordPress and your database that might contain a lot of information.
There is a lot of power here, isn't there, of being able to bring that third-party data into enterprise search as additional tabs inside the search experience. And it feels to me that this is one area that probably companies don't make enough use of. Some of those additional connectors, there's a kind of premium value on them, but there's a reasonable chunk in there that are included with Microsoft 365.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think and connectors for tools that people are already using, like ServiceNow, for example. So it's a good way of bringing everything into this one search experience. And when you are searching for information, you don't need like to go to different applications. So you could get everything from this one place. That's powerful.
And there's also some functionality for things like bookmarks and Q&A. If you've got an organization acronym finder, that you can have that information centrally stored so that when people are looking for acronyms, or there's a particular term that you want them to find a specific bookmark or resource for, you can embed those things so that when people are typing those phrases in, they will find this content specifically.
Yeah, that's really good. And you also, the locations are also supported
Right.
as part of this part of the
Like floor plan
searching.
type information.
Yeah, no, it is very useful like for the employees. So you need like to, of course, spend a bit of time configuring and maintaining like all the different keywords that map with the bookmarks and Q&A and so on. But it's definitely something you can do like to enhance the quality of the results that people get, and which might get them like closer to the information that they are looking for.
And the other area that's probably worth spending a little time on is the verticals that you can create. So in the search results field, when you type something into SharePoint, you end up in the search page and you've got these different verticals. And this option in the Search Intelligence Center allows you to create custom verticals, right?
Yes. So that's a very good point. You can define then like different type of information or data that you would like to bring to users. It comes with a very advanced query builder functionality. Like there is this term.
You got to know what you're doing.
Yes. You need to know what you are doing, like to be able to really build a strong query that will then kind of bring the results like from different sites, maybe, and different places of your, let's say, SharePoint Intranet in this one place.
The kind of thing that you could do with that, in theory, right, as long as you're able to, write in the language that it needs you to write in, is that you could, in theory, create a vertical that had a collection of sites that made up your intranet, right? So that when people landed in search on that search results page, they could click on a tab on that search results page called something like intranet content.
Yeah.
And that could be pulling content from the sites that are made up in your intranet. So you've got a way really of being able to provide this definition of, here's the results from my workload in the intranet. But I guess the challenge there that every time you add a new site, you've got to go back and update that index.
Yeah, depending on how like your intranet is structured, yes, definitely that would be an exercise, like continuous maintenance that would need to happen. You can also like have refinement options as part of this search vertical. Now, it's one search vertical, one tab among many others, right? So it's these aspects as we also like to consider.
Yeah. So, and I think that point about you can get close to the outcome that most people will be looking for here, but it's probably not going to give you exactly what you need, and may shoot some way under your requirement for an intranet search.
It's the nice thing about Microsoft 365. There are always a lot of configuration options that you can apply. You need like to spend the time then like understanding, and you can hire, of course, like a consultancy, like a company like to perform that on your behalf. But and that's like because Microsoft 365 is so extensible, there are tools like ours that come and solve that part of that.
As a kind of ham-fisted point that we could make on the podcast, right, is that we've built a solution for all of these problems in Fresh. We have our own intranet search that has been created off the back of having all of these conversations and challenge articulated to us from customers. So, what we've created is effectively an intranet workload search within the product, which has a roadmap. It's being enhanced with AI, lots of other things. So you have an option then to build something yourself using some technologies that are kind of supported in the community. It's somewhat official from Microsoft. So you can buy something like Fresh, for example. You could build something or find an organization that's going to build something in search for you as well, couldn't you? That's also an alternative.
Definitely, and that's because Microsoft is so flexible. So you have those options, right? You can build that yourself if you have the time, if you have the resource internally, if maybe you want to hire someone for risk. Yes, definitely. And you need to, you are building that, you need also to keep maintaining it, right? So no doubt about that. Now, you could also take the shortcut and buy a solution that has already implemented it and is further developing that based like on real scenarios that the clients are presenting.
Okay, so let's try to bring this to some conclusions then. So we talked at the beginning that enterprise search, this enterprise search that's provided in Microsoft 365 and all the different applications, is not a solution for specific workload search. So if you have this enterprise search, you have an intranet search, the two things aren't necessarily the same thing.
Yes. Again, so the search by default will be looking across your entire SharePoint, OneDrive, right? That's the data it's like retrieving. And if you want now like to have something specific, that's where you will need to buy. Well, there are options, right? So buying something that's ready is one of the options. And like, by the way, like why did we then build a search in Fresh?
Yeah, and I think the search feature that we created was based on all of this type of feedback from people not enjoying the enterprise search feature for their intranet. We had a number of conversations at the time about, are we adding more confusion in here by having two slightly different searches? But, I think the feedback that we had was it was valid to have an intranet search in the global nav of the intranet, and it's valid to have access to enterprise search. I think that, again, kind of relating this to my own world, I'm in the intranet and I am navigating around the intranet, and then I need to find a template or a statement of work or some client-facing document that doesn't belong in the intranet. I need to be able to use enterprise search to be able to find that content. If enterprise search isn't available to me in the intranet, I've then got to go somewhere else in order to initiate this other search.
Right.
So it felt right to have the two. We have an intranet search, we have an enterprise search.
You could also like go and hide, like the Microsoft search bar. So you could technically that's possible. So you could hide that. There is a PowerShell. Then this becomes very technical. So no worries. You don't need ask your IT people. They will be able to help with that. So there is an option. Unfortunately, there is no UI for this. So that's something I find not ideal. But yeah, so there is an option to hide that bar. Or as you mentioned, right? So there are the use case where you want to have the access to both, right? Yes. So the internet search and the data, the entire organizational data search.
Yeah, and obviously we think the best option if you're looking for a solution to this problem is to buy Fresh. Second best, maybe third best option is that you could build something yourself. That comes along with all of the risk of building additional features within SharePoint. But I think that I've sat in numerous presentations from customers at events where they're showcasing this out of the box SharePoint intranet, and when you speak to them afterwards, you say how do you find the search experience in your out of the box SharePoint? More often than not, they say, well, that is actually the one thing that we did customize, that we created a custom search feature for our intranet. So, I think particularly in large enterprise organizations, this tends to be, they need a specific search.
Yeah, one thing that I think we didn't mention yet, is what I miss when it comes to the search experience is there is no web part, no component by Microsoft out of the box that you can add to a page in SharePoint to create a a specific search experience in that place.
So yeah, in theory, having like a homepage that looks a bit like Google or Bing, right? Intranet search as being the only thing that's on that page.
Unfortunately, there is like no web part or ways that you can like start a search experience from a page in SharePoint, right? Always how you can like build a search experience where you have like your search box and like following search results. So that's unfortunately not available by default.
All right. Well, we will leave it there for this week. Good to see you, sir.
Likewise. Thanks, David.